Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stocked the last jar of pickles on the grocery store shelf. At 28, she had worked at Henderson's Market for 6 years, ever since her husband died in a construction accident. The small town of Cedar Falls, Texas, wasn't known for its opportunities, especially for a widow with a 10-year-old daughter to raise. "Sarah, can you come to my office?" Mr. Henderson's voice cut through her thoughts. His tone was different today, colder than usual. Sarah's stomach dropped as she followed him to the cramped office behind the meat counter. "I'm real sorry about this," Henderson said, not meeting her eyes. "But my nephew just graduated college, and, well, family comes first. I'm gonna have to let you go." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. "But, Mr. Henderson, I've been here 6 years. I've never missed a day, never been late. My daughter Emma, she needs—" I know, but business is business. I'll give you 2 weeks' pay, but that's all I can do." He handed her an envelope and walked out, leaving Sarah standing alone in the stuffy office. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at bills she couldn't pay. The rent was due in 3 days. Emma's school supplies needed to be bought. The old truck outside was making strange noises that probably meant expensive repairs. She had exactly $200 to her name, and in a town where jobs were scarce, finding new work wouldn't be easy. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma appeared in the doorway, her dark hair messy from sleep. Even at 10, she was wise beyond her years, having grown up too fast after her father's death. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff." Sarah forced a smile, the same one she'd been wearing for 6 years, whenever life got too heavy. The next morning brought no relief. Sarah drove to every business in town, from the diner to the hardware store. Each door she knocked on led to the same response: "Sorry, not hiring right now." By noon, her hope was fading faster than the morning mist over the Texas plains. At Molly's diner, her friend Jessica poured her a free cup of coffee. "Honey, I wish I could help, but we're barely keeping our heads above water here too. Have you thought about maybe leaving town?" Sarah shook her head. "With what money? Besides, Emma's finally settled here. She's got friends, good teachers. I can't uproot her again. Well, there's always the Circle K ranch. I heard they might need help with the horses. It's about 15 miles out of town." Sarah had heard of the Circle K. It was one of the biggest ranches in the county, owned by some wealthy family from back east. She'd never considered ranch work before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The drive to the Circle K took her through rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. Despite her worries, Sarah couldn't help but admire the beauty of the countryside. She'd lived in Texas all her life but rarely ventured outside town limits. The ranch was impressive, with a large main house, several barns, and miles of white fencing. Sarah parked near what looked like an office and took a deep breath. She'd worn her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and hoped she looked professional enough. Inside, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from her desk. "Can I help you? I'm Sarah Martinez. I heard you might have work available. I'm willing to do anything. Cleaning, cooking, helping with animals. I'm a hard worker, and I really need this job." The woman, who introduced herself as Betty, studied Sarah carefully. "Do you have any experience with horses?" "Not much," Sarah admitted. "But I learned fast, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Well, we do need someone to help in the stables. The pay isn't great, and the hours are long. You'd be working mostly with Jake, our horse trainer. He's particular about how things are done." Sarah's heart leaped. "I'll take it. When can I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 sharp. Don't be late. Jake doesn't tolerate tardiness." That night, Sarah felt hope for the first time in weeks. She told Emma about the new job, carefully leaving out how desperate their situation had become. "Will you be working with real cowboys, Mom?" Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I suppose so, sweetheart. Just like in the movies." But Sarah had no idea how different reality would be from any movie she'd ever seen. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Circle K as the sun painted the sky pink and orange. The ranch was already bustling with activity. Cowboys were leading horses out of stalls, and the air was filled with the sounds of neighing and the jingle of spurs. Betty met her at the stable entrance. Jake's already been working for 2 hours. He starts early and expects everyone else to do the same. Remember, he's the best horse trainer in 3 counties, but he's not known for his patience with beginners. Sarah nodded, trying to calm her nerves. She followed Betty into the stable, where the smell of hay and leather filled her nostrils. It wasn't unpleasant, just unfamiliar. "Jake, this is Sarah, your new helper," Betty called out. From the shadows of a stall emerged a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a Western novel, tall and lean, with weathered hands and boots that had seen years of honest work. His hat was pulled low, casting a shadow over his face, but Sarah could see enough to know he was handsome in a rugged way that made her suddenly self-conscious. "Ma'am," he said with a slight nod, his voice deep and gravelly. He barely looked at her before turning back to the horse he was grooming. "Can you muck stalls?" "I can learn," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident. Jake finally looked up, and Sarah found herself staring into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jake's expression hardened. "Learning takes time. Time costs money. Can you muck stalls or not? Show me what to do, and I'll do it." For the next hour, Jake showed Sarah how to clean the stalls, his instructions brief and to the point. He didn't waste words, but he also didn't make her feel stupid when she did something wrong. Instead, he would simply show her the right way and move on. By noon, Sarah's back ached, her clothes were dirty, and her hands were developing blisters. But she'd cleaned 6 stalls and felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. "Not bad for a first day," Jake said, appearing beside her as she leaned against a fence post. "You're stronger than you look." "Thank you," Sarah replied, unsure if it was actually a compliment. "Betty says you got a little girl." "Emma. She's 10. Jake nodded. "Town's not easy for a single mother." Sarah was surprised by the personal comment. "No, it's not. But we manage. This works hard, some days harder than others. If you're looking for easy money, this ain't the place." "I'm not looking for easy anything," Sarah said firmly. "I just need honest work to take care of my daughter." Something in Jake's expression shifted, just slightly. "Fair enough. Be here tomorrow at 6. We've got 3 new horses coming in that'll need extra attention." As Sarah drove home that evening, her body exhausted but her spirits lifted, she didn't notice the expensive car that had been parked near the main house. She also didn't see the well-dressed woman who had been watching the stables through binoculars. Her face twisted with displeasure. Victoria Ashford had come to check on her investment. The Circle K Ranch was her family's latest acquisition. Purchased more for tax benefits than any love of horses. She'd planned to visit for a few days, maybe take some photos for her social media, then return to her comfortable life in Dallas. But seeing some shabby local woman working so close to Jake Morrison had stirred something ugly in Victoria's chest. She'd had her eye on Jake for months, charmed by his rugged authenticity and the challenge he represented. Men usually fell over themselves to please her, but Jake treated her with polite indifference that only made him more appealing. "Who is that woman?" Victoria asked Betty when she returned to the main house. "Sarah Martinez, Jake's new assistant. She's a hard worker, good with the horses already. I don't like having strangers around the horses. They're valuable animals." Betty frowned. Jake vouched for her, and his judgment is usually solid. "Nevertheless, keep an eye on her. I don't want any complications." That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked, "Do you like your new job, Mom?" I think I do, sweetheart. It's different from anything I've done before, but the horses are beautiful, and the work feels important." "What about the cowboy? Is he nice?" Sarah thought about Jake's serious demeanor, his careful way of speaking, and the moment when his eyes had almost smiled. "He's interesting." But as Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, she had no idea that her new job would soon become the center of a storm that would threaten not just her livelihood, but everything she'd worked so hard to build for herself and Emma. The fragments of her life, barely held together by determination and hope, were about to be scattered once again. And the only person who might be able to help her pick up the pieces was a cowboy who'd learned long ago that caring too much only led to heartbreak. 3 weeks into her job at the Circle K ranch, Sarah had found a rhythm. Her hands were tougher now, calloused from handling ropes and tools. Her back had stopped aching every morning, and she could muck a stall faster than most of the other hands. More importantly, she'd started to understand the horses. That mare's favoring her left front leg, Sarah mentioned to Jake as they watched Buttercup walk around the paddock. Jake looked at the horse, then at Sarah, with something that might have been approval. "You're learning to see instead of just look." That's good. It was the closest thing to praise she'd gotten from him, and it warmed her more than it should have. Over the past weeks, she'd begun to appreciate Jake's quiet competence. He never raised his voice with the animals, never lost his patience even when dealing with the most stubborn horses. There was something peaceful about working alongside him, even when they barely spoke. But that peace was about to be shattered. "Sarah, I need to see you in my office." Betty's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Sarah followed her inside, noting how Betty avoided eye contact. "Is everything all right? Did I do something wrong?" Betty sighed heavily. "It's not you, honey. It's complicated. Victoria Ashford. She owns this ranch now. Her family bought it 6 months ago. She's been asking questions about you." "What kind of questions?" "About your background, your experience, why Jake recommended keeping you on." Betty looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I'm going to be straight with you. Victoria doesn't like you being here. She thinks you're not qualified, that you're a liability." Sarah's stomach dropped. "But Jake said I was doing good work. The horses respond well to me." "They do. And Jake's been fighting for you. But Victoria's the boss. And she's got ideas about how things should be run." That afternoon, Sarah met Victoria Ashford for the first time. She was everything Sarah wasn't: polished, beautiful, and expensive. Her clothes probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. She carried herself like someone who'd never been told no in her life. "So you're the woman who's been working with my horses?" Victoria said, looking Sarah up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "I have to say, I'm concerned about having someone with no formal training handling such valuable animals. I've been learning fast, ma'am. Jake's been teaching me, and I haven't had any problems with the horses. Jake's a wonderful trainer, but he's too soft-hearted sometimes. He sees potential where there might not be any." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "Tell me, what would you do if one of my prize stallions got injured while under your care? Do you have insurance? Could you cover the costs?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I would never let anything happen to the horses. I care about them." "Caring isn't enough, dear. These animals are worth more than your house, your car, probably everything you own combined. This isn't a petting zoo." The meeting ended with Victoria saying she needed time to evaluate the situation. Sarah walked back to the stables, feeling like she'd been kicked in the gut. She'd finally found work she loved, work that challenged her and made her feel useful. And now it was being threatened by a woman who saw her as nothing more than a liability. Jake was waiting by Buttercup's stall. One look at Sarah's face told him everything. "She got to you. She's going to fire me, isn't she?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Jake, I can't ask you to fight my battles. This is your job too." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she'd known him, his expression was soft. "Sarah, you're good with these horses. Better than most people who've been doing this for years. You've got instincts that can't be taught. Don't let some city woman who bought her way into this business make you think otherwise." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. "I need this job, Jake. Emma and I, we don't have anything else." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "My shift ends at 8 tonight. If you want to talk, I'll be at Molly's diner." That evening, Sarah sat across from Jake in a corner booth at Molly's, nursing a cup of coffee she couldn't afford but had ordered anyway. Up close, away from the ranch, Jake seemed different, younger somehow, despite the weathered lines around his eyes. Victoria's been asking questions about you, Jake said. Personal questions. What kind of personal questions? Where you live? Whether you have family in town? How much money you make? Jake's jaw tightened. She's looking for leverage. Leverage for what? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Victoria's been interested in me since she started coming around the ranch. I've made it clear I'm not interested back, but she's not used to hearing no. The pieces started falling into place for Sarah. She sees me as competition. You're a beautiful woman working closely with me every day. In her mind, you're a threat. The words beautiful woman hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, but she forced herself to focus on the real problem. So, what do I do? I can't quit, Jake. Don't quit. Not yet. Jake leaned forward. Victoria might own the ranch, but she doesn't know horses. She's been talking about bringing in some fancy trainer from back east, someone with credentials and awards, but the horses don't care about credentials. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into her work with renewed determination. If Victoria wanted to find fault with her, she'd have to look hard. Sarah arrived earlier, stayed later, and paid attention to every detail Jake taught her. But Victoria was watching too, and she was patient. The opportunity came on a rainy Thursday morning. Sarah was working with Thunder, a young stallion who was still learning to trust humans. Jake had been working with him for weeks, slowly building the horse's confidence. I want to see how Thunder's progressing, Victoria announced, appearing at the stable entrance with a photographer. I'm thinking of featuring him in some promotional materials. Sarah felt uneasy. Thunder was still skittish around strangers, especially when they carried unfamiliar equipment. Maybe we should wait for Jake. He understands Thunder's temperament better. I'm sure you can handle it. After all, if you're really qualified to work here, you should be able to manage one horse for a few minutes. It was a trap, and Sarah knew it. But refusing would make her look incompetent. She entered Thunder's stall slowly, speaking in the low, calm voice Jake had taught her to use. Thunder nickered softly and allowed her to approach. For a few minutes, everything went well. Sarah led Thunder out of his stall, and he followed docilely. But then the photographer started moving around, the camera clicking rapidly, and Thunder's ears went back. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, keeping her voice steady even as she felt the horse's tension building. "You're okay." But Thunder wasn't okay. The combination of the stranger, the unfamiliar sounds, and the confined space triggered something in the young horse. He reared up, his hooves flashing dangerously close to Sarah's head. Sarah did exactly what Jake had taught her. She didn't panic, didn't jerk on the lead rope, didn't shout. Instead, she stepped back calmly, giving Thunder space while maintaining contact through the rope. She spoke to him in the same quiet voice, waiting for him to settle. It worked. Thunder came down, snorting and shaking his head, but no longer panicked. Sarah continued talking to him, slowly moving closer until she could stroke his neck. "See? You're okay, beautiful boy. Just got a little scared, didn't you?" But when Sarah looked up, Victoria's face was triumphant rather than relieved. "That was completely unacceptable," Victoria announced loudly enough for everyone in the stable to hear. "That horse could have killed you. Could have killed someone else. This is exactly what I was worried about." "But nothing happened," Sarah protested. Thunder just got startled. Jake's been working with him on this exact situation. "Nothing happened because you got lucky. A trained professional would have recognized the signs earlier, would have prevented the situation entirely." Jake appeared at that moment, having heard the commotion. He looked from Sarah, to Thunder, to Victoria, quickly assessing what had happened. "Thunder's fine," he said after examining the horse. "Sarah handled it correctly." "That's your opinion," Victoria replied coolly. "But I can't have employees who put my animals at risk. Sarah, I'm afraid I have to let you go." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face as everything she'd feared came true. "Victoria, you're making a mistake," Jake said, his voice dangerous. "Sarah's good with these horses. Better than most people you could hire. My decision is final." Victoria turned to Sarah. You can collect your things and leave. Betty will have your final paycheck ready in an hour. Sarah nodded numbly, unable to trust her voice. She handed Thunder's lead rope to Jake, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The sympathy in his eyes was almost harder to bear than Victoria's cruelty. As Sarah walked toward her truck, she heard raised voices behind her. Jake was arguing with Victoria, his usual calm demeanor cracking. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a pile of bills and the final paycheck that wouldn't come close to covering what she owed. Emma was at a friend's house, unaware that their world was about to fall apart again. The knock on her door at 9 o'clock surprised her. When she opened it, Jake stood on her porch, hat in his hands. I quit, he said simply. Jake, no. You can't do that because of me. I didn't do it because of you. I did it because Victoria Ashford doesn't deserve to have those horses. She doesn't understand them, doesn't respect them. Today proved that. Sarah stepped aside to let him in, still processing what he'd said. But where will you go? What will you do? Jake looked around her small living room, taking in the modest furniture and the pictures of Emma on every surface. I've been thinking about that. I've got some money saved up, enough to maybe lease some land. Start small. Train horses for people who actually care about them. That sounds wonderful, Jake. But what does that have to do with me? He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Vulnerability. I want you to come with me, Sarah. You and Emma. Not just as a business partner. Though, I'd like that too. But as more. The words hung in the air between them, full of possibility and risk. Sarah's heart raced, but her practical mind kicked in just as quickly. Jake, I can't. Emma and we barely have enough money to stay here. I can't risk what little security we have on a dream. It doesn't have to be a dream. We could make it work together. But even as Sarah felt herself wanting to say yes, wanting to believe in the possibility of a different life, the sound of a car pulling into her driveway interrupted them. Through the window, she could see a police car. The knock that followed changed everything. Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Peterson. I hate to bother you this late, but I've got some papers here from your landlord. Seems you're being evicted for non-payment of rent. Sarah's world tilted sideways. That's not possible. I paid the rent. According to this, you're 3 months behind. You've got 72 hours to vacate the premises. As the sheriff handed her the papers and walked away, Sarah felt the last of her defenses crumble. Behind her, she could hear Jake saying something. But the words seemed to come from very far away. Everything was falling apart, and this time, she wasn't sure even a cowboy could save the Fragments. Sarah stared at the eviction notice until the words blurred together. 72 hours. 3 days to pack up the only home Emma had ever really known, and find somewhere else to go with no money, no job, and no prospects. Sarah. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. Look at me. She turned, and the kindness in his eyes nearly broke her all over again. This isn't the end, he said. We'll figure it out. How? The word came out sharper than she intended. Jake, I appreciate everything you've done, but you can't fix this. Nobody can fix this. You're wrong. Jake moved closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I've got a little place about 20 miles south of here. It's not much, just a cabin and some land I've been renting from an old-timer. But there's room for you and Emma while we figure out what comes next. Sarah shook her head. I can't take charity, Jake. Emma and I have managed on our own this long. It's not charity. It's partnership. Jake's voice grew stronger. I meant what I said about starting our own operation. I've got enough saved to lease some proper land, maybe buy a few horses. But I'll need help, Sarah. I'll need someone who understands horses the way you do. I've been working with horses for 3 weeks, Jake. That hardly makes me qualified to start a business. You've got instincts that can't be taught. You see what the horses need, how they're feeling. Today with Thunder proved that. You stayed calm when most people would have panicked. Sarah wanted to believe him, but the fear was too strong. What if it doesn't work? What if we lose everything? Then we'll lose everything together instead of alone. The simple honesty of it made Sarah's chest tight. She'd been carrying everything by herself for so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone willing to share the load. Before she could answer, headlights swept across the front window. Emma was back from her friend's house, and Sarah would have to explain everything: the job, the eviction, the uncertain future that stretched ahead of them. "Mom?" Emma's voice carried concern as she walked through the front door and saw Jake. "Is everything okay?" Sarah looked at her daughter. This brave little girl who'd already weathered too many storms for her age, and made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Emma, I want you to meet Jake properly. He's offered us a place to stay while we figure some things out." Emma looked between them with the sharp perception that children develop when they've learned to read adult emotions for survival. "Are we in trouble again?" "We're going to be fine," Sarah said, and for the first time in weeks, she actually believed it might be true. "But we're going to have an adventure." The next morning, Jake arrived with a truck to help them move. Sarah was amazed at how little they actually owned. 6 years of careful living had left them with only the essentials. Everything they cared about fit into boxes that could be loaded in a single trip. Jake's cabin was small but clean, tucked into a grove of oak trees with a view of rolling pastures. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen big enough for a table, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Emma immediately claimed the smaller bedroom and began talking about where she'd put her books and drawings. "It's beautiful here," Sarah said, standing on the porch and watching the sun set over the hills. "Gets lonely sometimes," Jake admitted. "But I think that's about to change." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Jake worked with the handful of horses he was training for neighbors, while Sarah handled the daily care and helped with the more challenging animals. Emma rode the school bus from the main road and spent her afternoons doing homework at the kitchen table, while Sarah and Jake worked outside. But Victoria Ashford wasn't finished with them. The first sign of trouble came when the owner of the feed store refused to extend Jake credit. Then the farrier who'd been shoeing Jake's horses for years suddenly found his schedule too busy to accommodate them. One by one, Jake's connections in the area began drying up. "She's spreading poison," Jake said one evening as he hung up the phone after another canceled appointment. "Telling people we're unreliable, that Sarah's dangerous around horses." "This is my fault," Sarah said miserably. "If I hadn't taken that job, if I hadn't threatened her little fantasy about you." "Don't." Jake's voice was firm. "Don't you dare blame yourself for her petty vindictiveness." But the damage was real. Without the support of local suppliers and services, their small operation was struggling. The horses they were training belonged to people from other counties who hadn't heard Victoria's rumors yet, but word traveled fast in rural communities. It was Emma who suggested the solution, innocently and without realizing the implications. "Mom, why don't you and Jake make a video like the ones I watch online? Show people how good you are with the horses." Sarah and Jake looked at each other across the dinner table. "It was so simple, it was brilliant. People love horse training videos," Jake said slowly. "And you've got away with the difficult ones. That's pretty special." They started small, using Sarah's phone to record Jake working with a particularly stubborn mare, while Sarah provided commentary. Sarah's natural warmth came through clearly in the videos, and her genuine excitement about the horses was infectious. The first video got a few hundred views. The second got a few thousand. By the fourth video, featuring Sarah working alone with a rescued horse that had been considered too dangerous to train, they had tens of thousands of views and dozens of comments asking for training advice. "People are asking if we do remote consultations," Sarah said, scrolling through the comments. "Look at this one. A woman in Arizona has a horse that won't load into a trailer, and she's willing to pay for a video call to get help." Jake leaned over her shoulder to read, and Sarah became acutely aware of his closeness. Over the weeks they'd been living together, she'd tried to ignore the growing attraction between them. It felt too complicated, too risky to add romance to an already uncertain situation. "We could make this work," Jake said softly. "Not just the videos, but the whole thing. Training horses, teaching people, maybe even offering clinics here on the property." "Jake." Sarah turned to face him, and suddenly they were very close. What are we doing here? Really? Building something, he said. Together. The kiss was soft and sweet, and felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. When they broke apart, Sarah was breathless. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. But I'm more scared of not trying. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of vehicles coming up the driveway. Through the window, Sarah could see Victoria's expensive car followed by 2 trucks. What's she doing here? Sarah asked, but Jake was already moving toward the gun cabinet. Jake Morrison. Victoria's voice carried clearly through the evening air. I know you're in there. We need to talk. Jake opened the front door but didn't step outside. Sarah stayed behind him, her heart pounding. Victoria, you're trespassing. I'm offering you one last chance to be reasonable. Victoria stood perfectly posed beside her car, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd be more comfortable in a boardroom than on a ranch. I want you to come back to work for me, Jake. With a significant raise and full authority over the training program. Not interested. Even if the alternative is watching your little girlfriend here get arrested for theft? Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What are you talking about? One of the men stepped forward with an official-looking folder. Ma'am, I'm Detective Morrison from the County Sheriff's Office. We have evidence that you stole equipment and cash from the Circle K Ranch during your employment there. That's impossible, Jake said before Sarah could speak. I was with her almost every day. She never took anything. Security cameras show her taking items from the tack room on multiple occasions, the detective replied. Mrs. Ashford has been very patient about this matter. But she feels she has no choice but to press charges. Sarah's mind reeled. She had taken things from the tack room. Old rags to clean with. A bottle of liniment when Jake asked for it. Basic supplies that everyone used freely. But she could see how those innocent actions might look suspicious when taken out of context. This is ridiculous. Jake stepped fully onto the porch, his body tense with anger. You know exactly what you're doing, Victoria. I'm protecting my property, Victoria replied coolly. But I'm also a reasonable woman. Drop this little fantasy about starting your own business. Come back to work for me, and I'm willing to forget about the theft charges. And if we don't? Sarah managed to ask. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. Then you'll be arrested, convicted, and your daughter will likely end up in foster care while you serve your sentence. Is your pride really worth that risk? The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of her world crumbling, but this time it was worse because Emma was involved. Because Jake would suffer too because of her association with him. You have 24 hours to decide, Victoria continued. Jake comes back to work for me, alone, or Miss Martinez faces the consequences of her actions. As Victoria and her entourage drove away, Sarah sank onto the porch steps. She's got us, Jake. She's really got us this time. No, she doesn't. Jake sat beside her, his voice steady despite the fury in his eyes. She's desperate, Sarah. This whole elaborate setup means she's running out of options. How do you figure that? Think about it. If she really had solid evidence of theft, she would have just had you arrested. Instead, she's making deals, giving ultimatums. That means her evidence is shaky at best. Sarah wanted to believe him, but the fear was too strong. Even if you're right, can we risk it? If she follows through, Emma could be taken away from me. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a determination Sarah had never heard before. I've got an idea, but it's going to require you to trust me completely, and it's going to require us to take a big risk. What kind of risk? Jake turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the same mix of fear and hope she felt in her own heart. The kind where we go all in and see what happens. Where we stop running from bullies like Victoria Ashford and start fighting back. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her room, Jake explained his plan. It was audacious, risky, and absolutely crazy. It was also their only chance to build the life they both wanted, without looking over their shoulders for the rest of their lives. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked when he finished explaining. Are you? Sarah thought about Emma, about the future they could build together. about the horses that needed their help, and about the man who'd stepped forward to save the fragments of her life when everyone else had walked away. "Yes," she said, "I'm sure." The next morning, instead of calling Victoria with their decision, Jake posted a new video. This one was different from the others. Instead of training horses, it was Jake and Sarah sitting on their porch, speaking directly to the camera. "My name is Jake Morrison," he began. "And this is Sarah Martinez. We want to tell you a story about what can happen when someone with money and power decides to destroy the lives of people who can't fight back." Over the next 20 minutes, they laid out everything. Victoria's harassment, the false theft charges, the systematic campaign to destroy Jake's reputation in the community. They spoke calmly, factually, letting the truth speak for itself. They also demonstrated their skills, showing how they worked with horses, how Sarah's intuitive understanding complemented Jake's technical expertise. They talked about their plans for the future, their dream of helping horses and the people who loved them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the video had thousands of views and hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of being bullied by wealthy employers. Local news stations picked up the story. The county sheriff's office announced they would be conducting a thorough review of the alleged theft case. Most importantly, offers of support began pouring in. Horse owners from across the region reached out, asking for training services. Feed stores from neighboring counties offered to deliver supplies. People they'd never met offered legal advice, financial assistance, and moral support. Victoria tried to fight back, issuing statements through her lawyers about defamation and harassment. But public opinion had turned decisively against her. The image of a wealthy outsider trying to destroy a local family's livelihood didn't play well in rural Texas. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the middle of their new training facility, watching Jake work with a young colt while Emma cheered from the fence. The property they'd been able to lease was perfect. Enough land for a dozen horses, a proper indoor arena, and a house big enough for their growing family business. Martinez Morrison Horse Training had become one of the most respected facilities in the region. Their online following had grown into a thriving business, with training videos, remote consultations, and a waiting list for in-person clinics. Victoria had eventually dropped the theft charges. Her lawyers had advised her that pursuing them would only bring more negative publicity. She'd also quietly put the Circle K ranch up for sale and returned to Dallas. But the real victory wasn't financial success or public vindication. It was the life they'd built together. Jake and Sarah as partners in every sense of the word. Emma thriving in a stable home surrounded by the animals she loved, and a future that stretched ahead of them, full of possibility instead of fear. "You know," Jake said that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "I never thought I'd thank Victoria Ashford for anything." "Why would you thank her?" Sarah asked, settling comfortably against his side. "If she hadn't tried so hard to destroy us, we might never have figured out how strong we are together." Sarah smiled, thinking about how far they'd come from that first day in the stable when Jake had barely looked at her. "So, what's next for us? Cowboy?" "Well," Jake said, pulling her closer, "I was thinking it might be time to make this partnership official. What do you say we get married?" Sarah's heart soared, but she couldn't resist teasing him. "Is that your idea of a romantic proposal?" "Sarah Martinez," Jake said, sliding off the porch swing to kneel in front of her. "Will you marry me and help me save Fragments for the rest of our lives?" As Sarah said yes and Jake slipped a simple gold ring onto her finger, she realized that sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you can find what you really need. And sometimes, when you're sure you'll be cast aside forever, the right person steps forward to save not just the fragments, but your whole heart. Emma came running from the house where she'd been watching from the window, throwing her arms around both of them in a hug that felt like home. In the distance, the horses nickered softly in their pasture, safe and content under the vast Texas sky. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged.